you just come from a breakfast with. Yeah, you just come from a breakfast with.
All right, thanks everybody for attending and coming to this panel to talk about establishing the parity between broadcast television and online video. We've got a distinguished panel of guests here that I will turn to just a second, allow them to introduce themselves. I am Jason Thibeault, the Executive Director of the Streaming Video Alliance, your moderator today. And just in case you don't know, the Streaming Video Alliance is really a global group of companies that have come together to build best practices and specs and requirements for online video. So really about driving the adoption of online video and helping companies build more consistent streaming services. So what I want to do right now is to start off, I want to have our panelists introduce themselves, talk a little bit about who they are, the company they work for, kind of give a little context as to why they're here on the panel. And we'll start with Andreas from Viaplay first.
Thank you, Jason. Yeah, I'm Andreas from Viaplay in Sweden. Viaplay is one of Scandinavia's largest OTT providers. The largest if you count live sports, which you do a lot of live sports every year. And we've been getting some attention and help over the years from the likes of Akamai, because we've never really been afraid to adapt new technologies. So we've been doing high frame rate dash live streaming for a couple of years. I think we were among the first in the Akamai network to do that. We were one of the first to demand SSL live streaming. We jumped on delivering dash over quick last year, and recently we started doing 4K live stream as one of the first in Europe, I think, if not the first.
Fantastic. John.
John Bishop, the aforementioned Akamai here. My career, I've been doing this for about 20 years, and we used to have conferences like Streaming Media, but we didn't call them OTT, we called it Rich Media back in the day when I started. And my career's always been about transition. So we had in the broadcast side kind of the SD to HD transition, and in the internet side, just a bunch of transitions, starting off with postage stamp images, getting slightly larger, and then finally hitting kind of these broadcast-like experiences. And I think we'll talk later about the word like, and I don't like the word like when we talk about broadcast-like. But my role at Akamai is I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the media division. At Akamai, we've got three primary divisions. We've got security and web acceleration experiences for web pages, and then we've got the media side. And I think most of you may know Akamai out in the audience, but we power actually a lot of these companies beside me. So thank you both, gentlemen, for the business that you've given us historically over the years. But we've been in business as a global leader in content delivery networks. We've got 200 plus servers scattered around the globe in over 120 countries. We're over 1,200 different autonomous networks out there. And our goal is to make any media experience, any digital media experience, perform better for the consumer. So get that content closer to the edge, make sure that they've got the richest experience possible. And we do that through a bunch of great math on the back end. So we've got a bunch of algorithms of how do we make the great unknown of the internet work, act, behave kind of as one owned network. And that's one of the challenges with the internet is no one owns the internet. It's a bunch of disparate networks. And so since we effectively overlay over the entire network of the entire internet, we can make things look consistent, predictable, something you can operate on, and something you can scale effectively. So in my role, I get to play in the sandbox. I get to focus 1 to 5 years out. In media, there's a lot of changes that we've done in the last couple of years. There's a lot more changes I'm sure we're going to get to as part of the panel. But appreciate all the attendance and the business that many of you in this room have given us historically.
All right, thanks, John. And Clark?
Yeah, Clark Pierce. I help run Fox Sports Go, which is our TV everywhere live streaming app. We do about 7,500 to 8,000 live events a year that are essentially just TV simulcasts, and then we do another probably about 1,500 to 2,000 organic, non-linear events as well. The main thing I focus on is really the live operations and the product side. That's the area that I'm most focused on. And I come from a television production background, so I have an interesting sort of 360 view of the whole sort of workflow and ecosystem, as everything is sort of turned into the same thing, which is kind of fun to watch and be a part of. But it's a product that's growing a lot for us, and we're seeing a lot more people using it on the go than we have in years past. And connected devices are also an area that's sort of growing for us as well. So it's a very interesting space to be in at this time, that's for sure.
All right, fantastic. Well, that's again, you guys are three, very interesting perspectives, and let's jump into the questions now. So I want to start off with something high level. We talk about linear broadcast, traditional television. We're talking about online video now, and this sort of parity between the two. Where is the disconnection? Why isn't online video like the television experience today? I mean, so can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm happy to field it kind of first. Let you guys talk. I'll talk about it from the tech side and what we see, because we do a lot of live video and linear video. And for semantics, I think one thing that maybe is a normalization, we differentiate between live events being something that's happening now. Think of it more news and sports, and linear being a 24/7, 365 playout service. So linear may be live events, but it also may be VOD that's made to look like live. So when we talk about that, that's how we use those two terms, and they are slightly nuanced to be different. But linear is something that's relatively new in the online space. And when you look at the challenges, I think it all starts with the fact that it is 24/7, 365. It's always going. And where you look at how the internet kind of grew up and the technologies associated with it, internet always, for a long time, equaled best effort. And best effort is not what's associated with television. When you turn it onto a television channel on your pay TV service, you have an expectation, and you expect that thing to work on whatever display device you go to, whatever room you're in, every single time. And the internet didn't align there. And so I think it's one of the things, when I look at the last 3 years of the journey that we've been on at Akamai, it's really recognizing that we have to get parity in the digital space with legacy pay TV services, or else digital's not going to go, there's a natural headroom. It's just not going to go beyond that natural plateau. At Akamai, historically, we've focused on scale, because without audience, without eyeballs, nobody cares, right? If I can only get out to 1,000 people or 10,000 people or 1,000,000 people, it's not a big enough number out there. So historically, we focused on, can we get to enough eyeballs? Can we scale the whatever media it is? If it's a sporting event, if it's episodic, can we get it to enough people? And by and large, I think we're largely there, or line of sight to there, with the exception of something like the Super Bowl, which is an anomaly event in and of itself, and that it drives over 100 million concurrent viewers on a television platform. But tens of millions, high single-digit millions, is an attainable number now online. So scale, I kind of say, yep, we check the box. The next is fidelity. How does it look? How does it sound? I think we've checked the box there. As I mentioned in my intro, we started off 20 years ago in digital doing little things, little postage stamp images, and maybe it was red, green, or blue. You couldn't quite tell if it was a moving picture or what it was, but it was there. It was a little square. And now it's very common to see HD and P50 and P60 experiences out there, and even 4K experiences. So in many ways, I think the digital platform has gone beyond television and fidelity. Some of the areas where it continues to be challenged is on the operational side, and I'm sure my colleagues can speak to what they see on the ops side. How do we have end-to-end visibility into what happens at every stage of the supply chain in digital? Broadcast is very, very regimented. There tends to always be a path A and a path B, and things are run in a hot, redundant environment, and you have heartbeat and telemetry on every single moving part. Online is maturing quickly in that space. We've done a lot of investments on our side there, but the operations side is one that there's still work to be done. I think it's a gap in getting parity there. And then last is monetization. So scale, I think we're kind of there. Fidelity, we're probably past television. We're probably better than television in many ways. Operations, still some work to be done. And monetization, digital, is the great thing about it, is its direct addressability is possible, but that's not the way that ads are sold often on television. Your television is largely about an aggregation of a large audience. There's a lot of potential there, but in those four dimensions, I think that's the measuring stick by which I look at how we're doing there: scale, fidelity, ops, and monetization.
I'll add a fifth dimension, which is the user experience. I mean, I think to me that's the big difference between a set-top box, if you want to call it that, experience, and a best screen available experience with an over-the-top service or a TVE service. I mean, we can evolve a UI on those digital platforms much quicker. Think about the last time you saw a different EPG from your MVPD. Those things do not happen quickly. We're constantly changing Fox Sports Go and changing the UI, and really moving it away from like a channel-based experience like TV and moving it into, you know, a more like, let's tell you when your shows are on. Let's get you to your shows. You know, the content can now find the user, and you really can't do that very well. I've seen it done pretty good on Xfinity's X1 and some things like that, but you know, think how long it took them to get there and what drove them to get there, which is the experiences that we're building. You know, Watch ESPN is a good example. The NBC Sports app is a good example. Like, we look at what they're doing all the time, and they're looking at what we're doing, and we're each pushing each other to better experiences, which are better for the user. So, you know, the user experience, we can really evolve. I mean, a couple of your points, John, just, you know, fidelity, I would argue, we're really not there, but I think that's more users don't really care. Mm-hmm. You know, it'd be great to have Dolby. Like, Dolby's been on our roadmap to support Dolby, and we keep looking at it at the bottom of the list and going, why does that not get up? No one's asking for it, and no one's fighting for it. But 60 frames per second, yeah, like, that was very important to us, and it's been very important to our users, and that's something that I think, you know, goes to your point of, have we made it, you know, as good as the television experience, and sort of that visual experience. I think in some cases we're better, you know, and we can do things online, or from a streaming perspective, where we can add additional content and more interactive experiences, which you can't do, and that's really a goal that we have right now, and that's something that we're very strongly focused on at Fox is, you know, how do we take TV to the next level on the digital platforms, because that's the most logical place to iterate, because we can do it quicker.
Andreas, about
Yeah, I agree. We have, you know, on the quality side, we're almost, you know, we're there in some ways, and we're surpassed linear in some other ways. I would say, you know, picture quality and stability, and we're roughly there. Then I think we have latency as the last point of which we like to address.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not trying to tee up, John, but that's, you know.
Yeah. I mean,
so yeah.
I mean, latency is. I mean, that's probably one of the biggest knocks when people, especially in the sport environment. You know, you have even on traditional television, you had something, the ha-ha effect. When somebody was interviewing someone remotely, and they'd say, "Hey, Bob, so how's the weather down there?" and Bob had to wait 2 or 3 seconds. That was kind of annoying as a viewer. What's really annoying as a viewer, though, is when my Apple Watch tells me that so-and-so just scored, and I'm watching an OTT experience, and I haven't seen that thing happen yet.
Yeah, we get, the common complaint that we get on Fox Sports Go is the apartment, you
Yes.
know, my next door neighbor is celebrating, and I guess it's, you know, I guess this is a good thing because the Patriots just scored, whatever the case may be. So, you know, yeah, latency is that's sort of that next frontier that, you know, I think we'll get to shortly. You know, we saw some interesting things this year at NAB. From Akamai and some other companies too that are all headed in that direction, so that, you know, everyone understands that need, and it's a consumer-driven need. You know, I mean, you know, social media monitoring is so important on live sports. You know, when you're doing live streaming and TV, but we are acutely in touch with those users, and that is the #1 complaint is latency. I mean, by far, you know, by far. So I think that's a big gap between the television experience and the streaming experience, and, you know, and I think the tech stack will continue to get better and better and address those things like latency. But, you know, operationally, I mean, there's lots of things we can do better than TV can do. You know, when we have a game scheduled at 4 and another game scheduled at 7, the 4 o'clock game runs long. You know, we can spin up a virtual channel and give the viewer the choice of seeing the end of the first game or the beginning of the second game. That's their choice, and in Go we can do that. On TV, you're not going to get that. You know, the home markets are going to be protected. They're going to move you to the start of the game, or whatever the contractual obligation is as per the rights. So that's one thing we do operationally, where we can be much more nimble and be able to support things. And that's a better user experience.
Yeah, so I think, you know, it's interesting. So we started with this question of what are the, you know, what are the differences between these two experiences, and you guys kind of branched into the next question, which is, you know, obviously we're seeing a drive in online video and demand for online video. More people are watching it, more people watching OTT, more people watching on mobile devices. But it's not mass adoption yet, right? We haven't seen everybody watching online video. And so you kind of got into there with this idea of latency, but what are the biggest challenges to really mass adoption until everybody is watching online video in lieu of broadcast television?
Yeah, I can go on this because I think the opening keynote addressed this in an interesting fashion. We controlled some parts of the chain, right? And even though we are certain that we don't have any, network issues in our facilities, we don't have any CDN issues, we can still get a lot of complaints from users that have problems. And it's not an easy thing to look into their issues at this scale.
Yeah,
I can imagine what to do, in a 10 times scale or 100 times scale.
Right,
whatever.
the end user's environment is something we have absolutely no control over.
Yeah.
We have no control over their connectivity. Have they updated their device to the proper level of software? Do they have our latest app? It's just, we go through a series of questions to try to troubleshoot that stuff. But you're right, and it's early days, right? So, that's what I was saying with the tech stack that supports all this. The engine under the hood of live video streaming will get better because of the things that we need to do. But broadcast television, that's kind of like a grooved discipline that's been there for a long time. But
Right.
I would say we're certainly evolving and innovating at a faster pace. But we have a long way to go before we get to that. I mean, scale plays a big part of it, but the numbers are just, the audiences are not the same. They just aren't, because the tradition has been in that traditional living room setting for years. But we now have these over-the-top products that are out there with traditional television channels that you can get at a better price point, and we'll see how much that space continues to grow. And if more people do it that way, it's a much more user-friendly product. It'll be interesting to see how the scale develops and reacts to all that.
Yeah, I think I agree. I mean, I think the consumers struggle with the notion of your mileage may vary. And when they pick up a screen, especially in the last 18 months, the conversation's really changed, where consumers, again, they expected internet to be best ever. Now they pick up a tablet or a mobile device, or they turn on their smart TV, and they just expect television everywhere, on any device at any time. And there should be no variability regardless of device type, regardless of, are they on Wi-Fi, are they on a cellular radio, are they on LTE, or are they on 3G? They just expect it to kind of work the same, which is an outstanding challenge for the consumer. That's really hard, right? Not all networks are created the same, and that's why we invented stuff like adaptive bitrate and all these variable models out there. But that creates a different experience for consumers as they go from different devices. Gary mentioned, even on the tech stack, the average client application out there, the little watch application that somebody goes to see, it's got 14 different APIs in that. That's 14 different moving parts within the app that you launched. All those might be at slightly different versions. There's a lot of variability in that, and so just normalizing that supply chain is a big element on getting consistency of experience. And I think that's one of the things that we hear from users is the internet behaves differently as I move around, as I pick up a different device, and that's not what television does. And so there's just a disconnect in expectation from television and what's being delivered right now online. We've made tremendous progress, and again, in a lot of areas, I think we're past it. I mean, latency, as we talked about earlier, I think this year will be the year of latency, where internet latency becomes less than what cable latency is. I had a call a couple weeks ago where a sports broadcaster, customer of ours, said, can you make the internet feed slower? Because now the internet feed was getting there quicker than a cable feed was. And I was like, well, I never thought I'd ever hear that day.
That's a good problem.
Right, and I was like, oh my goodness, so the internet feed's actually too fast? Okay, yeah, we can probably slow that down. I think that's kind of where we are in the cycle of things right now, is we clearly know that if consumers are gonna shift, and Jason, I think in many ways, we're seeing massive attrition of eyeballs on traditional pay TV platforms. I mean, you look domestically, Dish put out their numbers last week, 143,000 subscribers lost in the first quarter. That's a big number. And those people aren't not watching media anymore. They're going to different platforms. They're going to a Fox Sports Go app, or they're going to a Hulu, or various other platforms out there. They're going to Sling, as Dish has invested in that as well. I think we've got momentum right now, and I think we've got a lot of velocity. There's a little bit of a technology challenge. There's still a business challenge out there. I can think consumers are, I go to some of these apps and say, well, you can't watch this game on your mobile phone, but you can watch it on your tablet. And so you kind of think, well, that's weird, right? Why can't I watch it on one device and not? There's this fragmentation of rights out on the business side that has nothing to do with the tech at all. And I think just ironing out those, and those will naturally happen over the coming years as rights packages get renewed. But the fragmentation of rights is a big deal, and in some cases harder than the tech problems. I can't solve the rights problem. I can solve the tech problems as the CTO.
So I love it when panelists tee up questions. So that was perfect.
But he read the questions in advance.
Exactly, segued right into it. It's something that I've talked to people before about, and Clark mentioned this with the tech stack is, the way online video has gone so far, it's really sort of the tail wagging the dog, right? It's we did it because consumer demand was there, but we did it any way we could, and so the tech stack is kind of catching up. But what needs to happen now as the tech gets solidified is what John just mentioned, which is the business models. And so my question to you guys is, how do the business models need to change to support the consumption of online video? I mean, can it be the same ad pods in commercial time, traditional linear broadcast television type experience, or is it something new? Is it a combination of stuff?
I mean, Clark, you even played with stuff in the traditional side. I mean, it looks like, I look back at the U.S. Open you guys had last year, where you did it, even on the traditional platform, you did it very different in a monetization model. It feels like as a consumer, you guys are experimenting in a lot of different ways there on monetization.
Well, yeah, I mean, in advertising, you're always innovating just because the new shiny object is what the advertisers want. So, I mean, that's just, that's sort of table stakes in that space. But, with live sports, it's not like they're going to eliminate, the commercials because they're, these built-in timeouts and things like that. So, I could probably sit this question out just simply because we're always going to have ads of some sort. Now, there's a lot of discussion right now at the NFL level about reducing the amount of commercial inventory in the game to speed the games up a little bit, and we'll see where that ends up. But you're always going to have those natural breaks. And you just think about all these sports have kind of adapted to television, or television has adapted to them, but there's natural pauses in them. There are ways to make that experience on the digital side more interactive, and obviously, the advertisers like it on the digital side. The scale isn't really there yet. For certain events, like we worked on the Super Bowl with a bunch of partners like Akamai, advertising was the most important thing that we were doing that day, right? Sure. As one legend in sports television, Joe Assetti, there's probably one person in this room who knows who Joe Assetti is. But anyway, he once told me, "Kid, we're just Phil for the commercials. We're making TV, but we're just Phil for the commercials." And when you're doing the Super Bowl, that's what you are, and that's what you're doing. And but the beauty on the streaming side is that we have that data. We can't say the audience was this big or whatever. They know exactly what the audience was. They know exactly how many people looked at it and how many people clicked on it, and then we can provide a really good, experience, in real time in some cases on what's going on. So, I think that naturally is a better experience. I mean, if an advertiser had a choice between two events that were the exact same size on TV or on streaming platform, they'd take the streaming platform because they get the data. They know exactly who was watching it.
Sure.
But the scale's not there yet. So I think there's still a lot to be done there. But I don't think we'll see an ad-free Super Bowl anytime soon.
I mean, I think we're seeing some interesting innovation on putting ad spots in digital where they're not in broadcast as well. And right now we've got the hockey playoffs going on, and we've seen some pretty interesting things. If you're a hockey fan, you're used to these built-in timeouts based on what television's conditioned us to. But if you're watching a game, and let's say there's a face-off, it's only a 10, 12, 15-second kind of break in the action. Too small for television kind of to break away typically. But we've seen these little micro pods that have popped up, which when we look at some of our usage data and our viewing data out there, and these little minor sliced interstitial ads, so something like a face-off, this little 12-second, 10-second ad out there. Very few people actually walk away or hit pause. The engagement stays consistent. So if it's one of those that's tiny and it helps kind of spread that ad load out there, user acceptance of ads is, they're used to doing it. But we've seen on some of the VOD side of things, especially on some of the subscription VOD services out there where people get, every 4 minutes you get 8 different ads or 6 different ads. Some of it's a little ad fatigue out there. So I think there's a lot of experimentation of how do you're going to I completely agree, Clark, the ads aren't going to go away. It's just how we're going to do it.
Yep.
Is it these micropods? I think VR creates a very different experience of, if I'm wearing a VR headset, maybe the ad's not front and center in my viewport. Maybe I look over to the side, and it's almost the driving in the car billboard type phenomena. If I look over there, there's going to be an ad in my periphery, and so maybe there's some persistence there. I think what we've seen as far as like what you see in baseball, where you put the overlay ads on the backstop behind home plate. I think we'll see more elements like that coming into the digital platform moving forward. So a lot of experimentation on what we're seeing right now.
We have a company that we purchased a few years ago called TrueX, and they have an engagement ad that's essentially like a pre-roll, but it's a shorter ad unit, and the user is encouraged to interact with the ad, and it sells at a much higher CPM. It works great for VOD because you can give the user the option of engaging with this ad and eliminating all the ads during the VOD content that you're about to watch, or you can just get the traditional experience with the ad breaks. So the user always takes, the option A because they get to watch their content without interruption, and then that's a better advertising experience. A better advertising experience as far as the user and then also the advertiser. We've tried to do that on sports, right? But most people don't come into a sports event at the beginning. They come in during it, and the last thing they want is a 10 or 15-second ad, keeping them from seeing what's going on with their team. So we're definitely doing a lot of experimenting in that space, but it's hard to do in live sports.
Any thoughts on that, Andreas? I mean, you guys are delivering a digital product, right?
We're a subscription service, so I don't have that much input on ads. But I mean, sure, the smarter server-side ad insertion would probably help. We could do a lot of things. But right now, the subscription model is working quite well for us.
We've been experimenting with ways like John mentioned hockey earlier, and we're starting to put ads on TV, on the glass behind the goals, and so we've been working on ways to replace those and have those be different for digital versus linear, so that we can better serve those, because we're doing DAI on all of our pro product on the regional side, NBA, NHL, and MLB. And that's one of the big questions we get from the advertisers, and and I can see it coming with the behind home plate signage soon. How do we get that to be specific to digital, so that experience is the same as it is during the ad breaks. So there's some opportunities out there to make the brands even happier.
No, so it sounds like you guys are doing some innovation. Sorry, go ahead, Sean.
I was going to say, I think that's one of the areas in Parity that we're still gapped a little bit on the digital platform as opposed to broadcast as well, because Nielsen is the currency for television, and in digital, as Clark indicated, Nielsen samples, right? Nielsen says, oh, you had around 2 million people. In digital, you don't guess. You know exactly how many people. You know exactly, but there's not a direct Nielsen, or there's the Nielsen currency that exists in digital today isn't exactly what the Nielsen currency exists on traditional broadcast. And this has created a rationalization where people say, how do I get paid? How do I rationalize if I run my ads? Let's say I'm going to run common ads on my pay TV service, and I'm going to run the same ads on my digital platform. Do they count the same? Can I count all that towards one campaign? Across our customers, we see massive fragmentation in how that's handled and how that's responded. And so that entire ad domain, not just getting the ad insertion, but how do you even count the ad? And then, if someone skips the ad, if they watch the first 5 seconds, do you count that? There's a lot of business challenge there, and just rationalization of how the dollars are counted and how the impressions are counted, and the currency that exists out in pay TV world it's fixed. It's the wooden nickel of Nielsen.
So it sounds like, to me, that there's some innovation happening. There's some experimentation happening, but this is really one of those gaps between the broadcast television experience and online video. So one of the things you mentioned before, Clark, was we're not quite at scale yet. So let's talk a little bit about scale, right? What if everyone, let's just take North America, so 330 million people. What if everyone in North America, 90% of the people, were watching online video at the same time? What would that do?
Hold on, I got to make a call. Is that happening right now?
Yeah.
So how do we reach that scale? What do we have to do to get to that point where we can deliver the consistent quality of experience that people want online at mass adoption?
Yeah, look, the best analogy to that, I don't think that what you're saying is possible, but let's bring it back to a reality. The Super Bowl. There's you're 1.3 million concurrents, or wherever we got to this year, this past year, and next year it'll go even higher. The big concern there isn't handling those concurrents, it's them all going to break at the same time, right? Because it's not like VOD where, yeah, you got 1 million people watching, but they're all in a different place in the content.
Right.
This is live sports. Everybody's at the same place, so they're all going to make an ad request at the same time. How do you support that? That's the big question, and that's the big challenge, really, is how you do that. So we took a lot of time and effort and testing to come up with a way to be ready for that, and it'll be interesting to see. I think NBC's up next, right? How NBC approaches it next year, and how they do it, and obviously they have the benefit of how we did it, because we benefited from how they did it, 3 years or 2 years prior. So that's every break is anxiety for a lot of reasons on the digital side in an event of that scale. And we had a similar experience with Game 7 of the World Series, because we had lightning in a bottle with the Cubs playing, in this super exciting World Series, and then we had the rain delay, and all this added drama. We were just a benches clearing brawl away from having a Super Bowl audience, but we were close. So we were freaking out, that was bigger than we thought it was going to be, and nobody could have anticipated that. So, but that scale is still, less than 5% of what you're getting on TV,
right, exactly.
roughly. So your magnitude's smaller. So it's hard for me to fathom a world where 330 million people all, turn on Fox Sports Go at the same time. It'd be lovely, but
MBOs are met for the year.
I have a feeling we'd be on the phone with a lot of people if that ever happened. But we're clearly not there yet. But I think we're getting there. The first Super Bowl we did, we just took linear ads. We didn't even mess with DAI. It was just no, we're not doing. There's no. And the advice we got from our partners was this can't be supported. So we just said, this is what we're doing. But within 3 years, we were doing DAI. So that's, we're getting there. I think we're getting there.
It's one of the, I think I'm still got the chills actually thinking about 330 million. It's interesting, Clark goes kind of go to the ad side, because I think it's good hygiene. When you look at the supply chain, a lot of people come to the CDN and say, can you handle 330 million concurrent? Things are going to break a lot sooner before you get to 330 million concurrent at a high data rate. And it really is this weakest link problem. It might be the ad insertion element. We learned a few years ago in some Olympics and other events on even things like authentication services. When you come in, you put your TVE password. If the risk of saying something like, hey, right now it's a no-hitter in a baseball game, or Usain Bolt's getting ready to run, is it creates surge velocity. And so a lot of people come in at one time, and that taxes a system in it's not a smooth join, right? It's not laminar. And because of that, you get a system that's used to, hey, I can handle, maybe it's 500,000 concurrents, maybe it's 10 million concurrents, but they're all smoothly joined, as opposed to this big burst and this big spike. And when you look at what informs a lot of our investments and best practices at Akamai, we focus on how do we break something? How does it break under load? How does it break under surge? And everything gets wobbly on the wheels at some point. We're still learning how to do this. From an audience size perspective, like I mentioned earlier, tens of millions. I look at some of the events even outside of North America, like what we do in India with the World Cup and cricket. Tremendous audiences coming in. For the VOD side of things, we had 80, 90 million people viewing VOD experiences. Like right when the game ended, everything went over to a VOD service. So we had a concurrency on VOD that was in the high double-digit millions. Tremendous audience there, but lower data rates. So there's always a balance between how many people are watching. Are they watching at what data rate? Are they watching first-party ads? Are they watching third-party ads? And again, it kind of gets into this planning process. One thing I can say is you can't, especially for these sentinel events, and that's where we see the large audiences, is more in the kind of the sport and news, or Game of Thrones is launching or something like that. Those sentinel events, start the planning process early, and just keep hammering home on it, because the hygiene is the most important thing. Look at every part. Where does it break? Engage your partners. I mean, one thing with both of these companies up here, I can, thank you to you both. We get around these round tables early on and whiteboards in the room to say, okay, what are we going to do? And that might be, it seems like the event is 9 months or 12 months out, and it's here before you know it. And there's a lot of moving parts, and it's good software hygiene, code freeze, all that other stuff that you do. These are necessary things because there's a lot of variability, and variability and scale aren't things that mix really well.
I think, besides the obvious, when you're talking 300 million euros, you would need a good infrastructure in the entire region and the whole of North America. And I don't know, I can only speak for Scandinavia, where we have very good infrastructure on broadband and penetration and all that. But even so, as we raise the bar, which we do, just try to keep up. I think one of the things we haven't talked about is that you need to be redundant in so many ways that you can't even think of them. You think, okay, we're at almost 100% redundancy right now, but then you forget that you add a couple of things and you throw in a couple of new services, which may or not be that redundant, and even the little, the smallest pieces when they break at scale, that's a huge issue.
So it seems like, from what you guys are saying, we're still building towards this parity. Where we've got, it's an interesting point you just brought up, Andreas, that you're introducing these little tiny elements into your workflow, like an authentication server or a new, ad measurement tool or a new QoE tool, and one little thing breaks and it can bring the whole house of cards kind of tumbling down. And that's, I guess a little scary at this point, right? For people who want to transition they want to cut the cord, or they want to be a cord never, and they want to transition to online video, they want it to work the same. They just want to sit down, press the power button, and perfect picture, works great. So that brings me to my next question, really, which is about consistency of experience, right? How do we guarantee a consistency of experience for online video? What's it going to take?
One thing that we've started to see is actually this metric being looked at a lot more, where online video is largely defined, as many probably people in the audience know, by this adaptive bitrate ladder. And so one stream goes out, there's several different versions of it that vary by resolution and bitrate. And the whole goal of that is to create a non-buffering experience. So if someone can't connect at the top end stream, which might be 5 megabits per second, maybe they connect at 3, maybe they connect at 1, and if there's any network congestion, that they kind of hop around. Well, each one of those creates a different fidelity of experience. And one thing that's being, one of our customers said that I love this as a quote. They said, consistency is better than better. And what they meant by that, of getting an 8 meg stream for 30 seconds and then transitioning down to a 4 and then back to a 6 and then back to a 2, creates this, the user might not know how to articulate it. They might not know, oh, hey, I'm having data rate shifts out there, or I'm shifting in my ABR data ladder. But they'll say the picture gets fuzzy, or it starts to get pixelated, or it gets blocky, or something like that.
Or something that you don't understand.
Or something, yeah, right. And then
Or your service sucks.
Yeah, your
That's
service
usually
sucks.
what-
Yeah, hashtag, right? Service sucks.
Yeah, go 1, 2, 3. You suck.
Right,
Yeah, that's what you
exactly.
get, yeah.
And so it's one of those, I think we're now learning that adaptive bitrate was a very good model to keep an experience out there, a consistency of connectivity, but it doesn't actually add to consistency of experience. It actually, in some ways, produces this variable experience that consumers say, why has it changed? Why didn't it just always stay the same? And there's a few things that are happening. There's movement on the technology side from changing from a TCP-based protocol stack to UDP. It's something we've been participating in for a long time. Google has been driving this as well, and I think we'll see more around UDP-based delivery, and that just helps us get more consistent throughput. And throughput kind of is the first thing you got to check, right? If someone's bandwidth changes, it's tough to overcome that. So how can you do things intelligently, smartly, at the right level of aggression and throughput control? One of the first steps is going to be this protocol change that I think we're in the early stages of. You guys have been experimenting with this as well. Yeah. We're seeing some great numbers on people who are able to get the higher experience for longer session times, and that's what we want. We don't want these sessions kind of going up and down, up and down.
Yeah, that would help. I mean, the transmission itself, sure. We also seen some cool stuff with codecs, and I mean, the compression efficiency would be I mean, we want it now. We probably have to wait until next year, but that will probably help a lot in conjunction with new protocols and possibly even new formats.
Consistency is an interesting challenge just because there's so many different devices,
Mm-hmm.
that you have to support, and the UIs, sometimes you're not in total control of what that experience is. So that is a, you need a really good QA group, that is understands what the level of quality that we want to, the experience level. Here's the experience level we want to serve, and anytime we drop below one of those on a platform, we know we've got work to do. So. It's hard because you want to keep everything consistent, but you may not have the audience that justifies getting those extra features and things that can keep you consistent. So it's an interesting challenge from a product standpoint. Something that we spend probably too much time thinking about, if that's fair to say.
Absolutely.
We had something that we don't see often in the broadcast space because most broadcasters want to get as much audience as possible, right? It's kind of the name of the game. But we've seen some of we did a premium sporting golf event back in the spring, and they actually went out with this kind of Uber experience of it was a 4K P60 experience, went up to 15 megabits per second, looked really, really great. But one thing that they did that was kind of different than the normal broadcast thing, and they said, hey, to watch this, these are the two devices you can watch it on. It has to have these different software levels. So they were very, very prescriptive to exactly to Clark's point of to kind of get rid of that variability, because people say, oh, I've got Apple or Android. There's thousands of different Android versions out there. That's not a one-size check. So they said you need this smart TV or this smart TV or this console running this software version, running this version of our app. So they kind of painted themselves in a little bit of a corner of who their audience size could be. But it created this prescriptive, very known environment so your QA teams don't have to chase every single permutation out there, and it created tremendously long engagement times. I mean, session times were outstanding. I mean, well beyond the hour mark at very high data rates, and it created an experience that socially people responded very, very well to.
All right, so I want to make sure we have time for the audience to engage with you guys. I mean, great resources up here, lots of knowledge about streaming and online video and this sort of transition from broadcast television. So does anybody have any questions right now for any of our panelists? Right here up in front. No, just go ahead. You say it, I'll repeat the question, and then they can answer.
I actually have a question for each of you, and it all revolves around the same topic, which I would call the holy trinity of what will differentiate, I believe, streaming from the broadcast and cable industry, and that's 4K, 60p, HDR. Okay, so for Andreas, I want to know what bit rate do you think that's going to take? For John, I want to know these 200 servers that you got where you claim you can do 10 million concurrent streams. If you get to that bit rate, how does that number go down from 10 million concurrent streams? And from Clark, I want to know if they could do it. You guys even have the production facilities in place to produce 4K programming out of these 8,000 shows you do, or events you do every year. I mean, what percentage of those could actually produce a 4K program stream?
So really, so your question is
it real?
It's 4K real. It's 4K real. That's the question for you guys.
I'll repeat your question. You were asking about the bitrate required for 4K at 60 frame rate with HDR. So I can only speak from my experience because it kind of revolves around the content and how, let's say, how picky you are about quality. But we've only been doing it with HEVC. And I would say that right now it won't make much sense to go below maybe 15 megabits if you want to obtain top quality. You can probably go down to maybe 12, but then I would start to be annoyed by the artifacts and things with the picture. So I would say maybe in the range between 15 and 20 megabits in HEVC. If you're doing high frame rate, if you're doing half,
Yeah.
you can cut it considerably.
4K, 60 HDR. So John, if it's 15 megabits, how many concurrent streams can you do?
Do the math.
What country
Sorry,
are
man.
we in? It depends. I mean, and I hate to give that answer, but it does depend on where you are. You look at something like the U.S. from broadband connectivity, we're around 18th globally. And so there's a little bit of a last mile challenge there. How many people can get that? How many people can persist that? Again, that's where something like UDP would be out there. So if you're going to get a 15 meg stream out there, you've got to say, well, you probably cut your audience down, even domestically, down to a factor of probably 30% of what's available on the broadband side right now. It's funny because there's no such thing as unlimited capacity out there, but we're always doing capacity modeling, and it's, we'll look back at something like the Super Bowl from last year, and we had, you see these peaks at these events. Within about 12 to 18 months, the peaks become the norm. So that shows that, the trend line's growing, our capacity's growing. On something like a 4K P60 with HDR, fortunately HDR doesn't add a whole lot of headroom in there, which is kind of nice, but millions of concurrents right now would not be a scary number. 10 million domestically, some planning would be needed. 100 million, yeah, let's talk offline. I mean, I need more of a whiteboard. But I think this is also where you're going to use other techniques. It's not going to just be, unicast, which is the way that streaming happens today, isn't the answer as we continue to scale out there. The multicast, which everyone's probably heard of multicast since 1995.
It's the next thing.
Right, it's the next big thing. We've been investing in multicast, but it exists in islands out on the internet. Multicast is great for closed networks, so certain networks we can do little multicast pods. Client-assisted delivery, some people call that peer-to-peer. Peer-to-peer sometimes has a nefarious nature, but client-assisted delivery, like some of the newer peer-to-peer models, help on some of alleviating some of that. So those numbers can scale, but there are change that has to drive that. It's the protocol, it's multicast, it's peer-to-peer, and unicast doesn't go away in any of this, don't get me wrong, but I could see line of sight on that to double-digit millions in the near term. Anything beyond, that 10, 15, 5 to 15 number, I can kind of see in most developed countries. Beyond that, there's some pretty extensive planning and more change that's needed ahead of us.
If somebody announced they were going to do the Super Bowl in 4K 60 HDR, what would happen?
Oh, we'd love to do that. When you got to get it? You got it in 2 more years?
Well, we support 60 frames per second for iOS and Android devices currently on Fox Sports Go. So if you fired it up right now, you'd be watching in 60. We actually removed that rendition for the Super Bowl. And we did that to make sure that we could provide a consistent experience based on the scale. So, to your question around 4K and 4K events, Fox Sports 1 is currently we have an obligation, and with one of our partners, DirecTV, we provide a certain amount of 4K events to them, and they're all on FS1. There's I think 60 over the next 18 months or so that we're doing for them. None of them will be available in Go at 4K. We don't have the infrastructure, the players, the software built around that type of an experience. But I think we are more focused, at least I'm not speaking for Fox here, but I am more interested in HDR. Yeah. I think that, to me, is a much more interesting direction than 4K. But, money is the answer to all questions, and money is going to dictate where this whole thing goes. So I'll give you a quick story. When we went from SD to HD, I was still on the production side, and I watched that whole thing happen, and I was an active participant in the whole thing. We didn't get an extra dime out of any subscriber because we started doing games in HD. We had to pay for all new trucks, everything, cameras, monitors. Directors had to be retrained. Like, everything changed, right? We didn't make any extra money, but the big box stores made tons and tons of money. So when it was time for 3D, they came around and said, "Great, we're doing this again. Here we go." And I'll never forget our chairman, David Hill, at the time. He said, "We're not paying for this one. If you want to do it, it's on you." And that has gone away, right? I mean, nobody's doing 3D sports anymore. So I kind of feel that way with 4K because we're not picking up the tab and we're not out there saying, "We need a new 4K truck and we need to, do all these sorts of things." There's obligations where we do it, and it's an interesting experience. Some events, I mean, the UFC stuff I've seen is fantastic. I mean, just fantastic. The stuff that's a little bit wider, to me, is not as compelling, but I'll be interested to see where it goes. But either way you go, 4K, 8K, HDR, it's all new trucks, all new, you know, and the consumer has to change, the set-top box have to change. I'm
Even to go to HDP 60, right? You look at 1080p
Yeah.
60. I mean,
it's still
new gear.
So it'll be interesting to see where it goes. But the one that I find myself researching the most and reading about the most is definitely HDR. I think that could be the most impactful visual change.
Yeah, I think we forget like the whole SD to HD transition. Consumers saw a difference because the aspect ratio changed. They went from a square to a rectangle. Most consumers are pretty good at seeing that.
I still go into friends' houses and unstretch their screen and put the, you know, I mean, I still to this day do that. So
There's a help group for that, you know?
yeah, well, I'm a help group of one for yeah.
But I think that's one of the challenges, from a personal consumer perspective, of 4K. A lot of people, there is no aspect ratio change. So, you know, you go into the big box stores and somebody says that, when the consumers are out there going, now is that HD or is that
Yeah.
4K? HDR, if you haven't seen it, it's compelling. I mean, you look at it and it's an SD-HD transition. It's bigger than that.
Yeah, it is a definite visual difference. Like it is like, okay.
I have to add to your question, and because 4K kind of, you know, raises the bar on the end user a lot. Because, you know, even if you do high frame rate 1080p, the user's home network can probably manage it. But once you go to 4K, you inevitably take a big jump in bit rates, and that's when, you know, we can do everything right. You know, the ISPs can do everything. You deliver the connection to the household perfectly, but then it comes down to this whole complex chain of delivery comes down to an end user's poorly configured Wi-Fi, or you know, not poorly, but you know, not perfectly configured, and a 20 megabit stream, live stream, delivered consistently. It's really demanding on the Wi-Fi, and then you can go ask the customers, you need to use a wired connection. But you know, many of them won't because they can't maybe, or they, you know, wires are ugly. People will use Wi-Fi no matter what you tell them, and there's a big difference in delivering a consistent 4K stream over Wi-Fi. I had to do a lot of personal research to get my home connection stable enough.
Don't you think this is another case of the tail wagging the dog? That Sony's not going to make a high dynamic range 1080p set. So as much as you might want to go to HDR without going to 4K, it's probably not really feasible.
It'll have that in there, but they're going to advertise the 4K HDR side of things.
Let me take another question in the back, right there. Yeah.
Just wondering how much of your concerns with regards to consumption of content by mobile. Within kind of just web traffic terms, you see a 60-40 split of mobile to desktop. How much are you concerned about not set-top boxes, not in people's basements, but just devices?
From our side, it's a pretty clear line of when people. Sports is a real guilty party on this. Like when they push a news alert that says, you know, somebody's hitting for the cycle, people will go on their mobile phone quickly. And by mobile, I mean they'll use their cellular radio. They're not looking for the right Wi-Fi radio at that point, so they'll be on cellular. If they start from our side, if it's viewing time that gets in double-digit minutes, consumers, especially domesticated, are pretty well conditioned. They know their data rates are running in the background, and so they'll get on a Wi-Fi network. And once they get on a Wi-Fi network, we'll see reasonable retention times, right? Sub an hour, but you'll watch somebody will watch an entire episodic, especially if it's a millennial, on this device if they're connected on Wi-Fi now. The cellular radio side, the nice thing about them hopping off of the cellular radio is there's just a lot of variability on that thing. But it's a mobile-first environment. I think all of our producers look out there and say, hey, we're going to have a lot of people on mobile. I know we have a lot of discussions on how do you even define mobile. Some people don't define a tablet as mobile even though it has a cellular radio in it. So we've seen that from the right side, I think, with you guys.
A question right there?
So quickly on the, again, on delivery, and it's more for Clark and Andreas, you talked about 50 megabits. Next up's maybe 89, 81, next codecs. So you drop your bit rates. So where's the game for you guys on that one? When you look
So we're watching it very closely. There's the problem with it requires quite some significant change to the transcoding process or the architecture of the streaming setup, while not reaching the complete audience. So I think there's a lot of people really having high hopes for AV1 to take off, and we've also gotten some promises from the likes of Google, which stated that YouTube will be AV1 compliant from the first day of the bitrate. What is it called? The bitstream freeze, or? Yeah, I think so. they're not up to spec yet. They will before the end of the year, and by day one, I think they said that YouTube will handle AV1 from day one. We'll see if we can do that, but we don't want to go in, having to support 4, 5, 6 different codecs. We would preferably have to handle one, and with maybe in CMAF, we can, that's the like super optimistic scenario where you could do CMAF and AV1 and you could reach 100% of your devices and it'd be much lower bit rates and better quality and all that. But that's what we're monitoring at least. And meanwhile, we'll try to optimize the current setup.
One thing on fragmentation, just on that, and we hear the same answer, is if you got fragmentation of formats, your storage costs have gone up, right? Your cache efficiency has gone down, so your origin load's gone up, right? There's increased operational burden. Yes, you got the benefit of being a more efficient codec for that size of the audience, but two, you get 100% propagation, which takes time. We're absolutely supportive of new codecs on our side, put them into our transcode systems as well, but in a one-size-fits-all audience, that's a long window. That's a 5, 10 year process typically.
You have thoughts on that, Clark?
I mean, latency is still the number one thing that we're sort of monitoring and hoping for. But this is right in line with that 1A kind of status in our world. So anything that can help us give the consumer a better experience, we're all for. But we need to see it and be able to play with it. And so as you said, monitoring. That's a good phrase, because I think we're in the same state of mind. Is show us what you can do, and then we'll be happy to test and play with it.
Well, we have time for one more question in the back.
Yeah, I've got a question for bachelor number 3 there.
Yeah. So did you plant this one?
Yeah, this is why cue the doves.
When we go to commercial break, you have a panic attack for
Right.
a big event. How do we make that go away? Like, when do you see that going away? What technology, would you rather use? Because every time you get a commercial break in a large event, having a panic attack, there's no way to make it work.
It's a good question. I don't have a solid answer. I mean, I think we do our next Super Bowl in 3 years. We'll see. We've requested a Red Sox Cubs World Series. So we'll see, how that goes in Game 7. Maybe we'll have that moment because we were promised that. I don't have a good answer. I just, there's a lot of money riding on those rolls, right? And it just takes me back to the old days of seeing the old stack of tapes that they would put in and take out and put in and take out. And I envision that in my head, like all those tapes have to go in the right order and they have to be labeled and they have to be done. And I might be adding my own extra layer of anxiety to it, but we had some issues this past Super Bowl, and it's something that we still have to get better at. So.
How do you make it more mechanical than scientific, right? That's sort of the big silver wheel tape.
Yeah, I mean the Super Bowl is just different because it's such a big event still, and we talk about scale a lot. So, we're doing DAI right now as we speak on at least 5 24/7 channels, and I'm not worried about those. So. We've gotten to that point because there was a time in 2014 when I was worried about that stuff all the time. So I think your point is valid. I think we'll get there, but the Super Bowl is probably always going to be a little bit different just because it is the Super Bowl.
All right, listen, we are out of time, so if we could give a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you guys a lot. Really appreciate it. And thank you very much, everybody.